Reporting in the news, this week Stats SA released a report saying that the number of people living in poverty in South Africa has increased. 3 in 5 South Africans live below the poverty line. Unfortunately, the situation has been predicted to get worse given the stagnant economy and, of course, a growing population. Well, joining me in studio is Lumkile Mondi. He's a political analyst, economist, I should say, from the School of Economic and Business Sciences at Wits University. But before we have a chat to him, if you'll remember on Wednesday, we had Statistician General Pali Lehohla here on the program, and I began by asking him about the numbers, and I must say, he painted a rather bleak picture for the future. That number is a very difficult number to digest. 3 out of every 5 black South Africans are living in poverty. I mean, this is a figure that should have gotten better, should have turned around, and yet it's getting worse. And we look at the circumstances surrounding every South African here. Everything is increasing, and yet the money is decreasing that individuals are earning. What do we need to do, Dr. Lehohla? What do we need to do?
I don't think there is a clear end in sight in relation to that fact, that the majority population, in fact, is 3 out of everyone, and we don't see education inroads in there. I mean, if you look at the quarterly labor force surveys, they are telling a very difficult story, that the numbers of people that are unemployed. So you have poverty, which is a child, has the face of a child. You have unemployment, which has the face of a youth. Now, you can see that people graduate from poverty into unemployment, and then they go and reproduce poverty. And the majority of these are black. So there is an industry of reproduction of poverty, and the demographics are against us.
All right, so those were the words of our Statistician General. Let's talk to our guest now. Thanks so much for being with us here on the program. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. All right, so we've emphasized it, we've said it. I don't think we can say it enough, however, because these numbers are very scary. 3 out of every 5 black South Africans are living in poverty. And as the Statistician General said, it doesn't appear that there's an end in sight. From your perspective, give us your views. How dismal is the situation?
Well, remember that our promise of 1994 was a promise of a society that constitutionally redresses, particularly the widening gap that we see between the haves and the have-nots and between black and white. And simply, I mean, particularly in the last 10 years, there's been a shift away from our constitutionalism, where we're seeing that despite us adopting the National Development Plan, that no one is focusing on how we're bringing black people into the mainstream of the economy by really ensuring that not only on the social wage, where we deliver on school, we deliver on free water and some part of energy and RTP houses, but we look at how we improve the lives of our people. And the focus has shifted completely because the state itself has been repurposed for personal accumulation, as we've seen the impact that and the focus of the country into our SOEs rather than on our people who remain marginalized in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned SOEs, and I suppose it's a good time to bring it up. We've been talking about SAA this week, and we're looking at the amount of money that has been pumped to try and save just that one state-owned enterprise. This year, we've already seen 2 billion. Over the last, I think 20 years, there's been around 20 billion that's been pumped into the airline. Now there's talk of another 10 billion. The amount of money, that could have been used to better the lives of South Africans. Why the interest on trying to save an airline, for instance, that is not profitable?
Well, firstly, I mean, there's lots of things. Firstly is the whole repurposing of the state, where the constitution, which is supposed to be guiding us, where the state could use the constitution in fulfilling the promise by ensuring that we work on policies that are redistributive, specifically ensuring that companies, in terms of our broad-based black economic empowerment, they're doing what they're supposed to do. What is more also critical is the state working very closely with the private sector, because they're the ones that create employment opportunities. In that regard, we need policy certainty. We need to ensure that the incentive that government gives through the DTI go to the right places, and those jobs, that business that receive these incentives does the right thing. So in the absence where the state is repurposed, where our politicians are focused on other things than the constitutional mandate, we shouldn't be surprised where we are. That is why we're saying we need leadership that is going to focus on the people, that the promise and the focus on an airline such as SAA, which really means very little for those that are marginalized and are living below the poverty line. That a strategy of how to create jobs, how to ensure that these communities and these households that don't have access to food are fed, using some of that money into our social development. I mean, that 10 billion rand that the Minister of Finance is talking about, that we were very lucky, that is what leaked, and that the DA politicians got it, and now we're talking about it. That money should be going towards areas of intervening, of ensuring that no household in South Africa does not have food. So we should be focused on how can we use it to address this poverty issue than just building out an airline, which means very little for the majority of the people of South Africa. Because the competition has shown, the ComAir, the BAs and others have shown that there's money to be made. So why are we using public resources when we've got a problem of high levels of unemployment, high poverty levels, which is a crisis that the country and our leadership should be talking about?
Let's talk about what the Statistician General emphasized when he announced these results, and that is the issue of education, because he couldn't speak about it enough, saying that if you educate the nation, it will change the face of it. Now, if we go back to look at the apartheid regime, obviously there were plans in place that were put there to ensure that blacks received substandard education. However, we've moved on, and that's we look at the legacy, but I think to blame the legacy still is a fault itself. We've had enough time to change the education system and help the future generations of this country to enlighten themselves. What's been happening? Why has that not moved and happened fast enough?
Well, I mean, remember that, Leon, that we had a very serious challenge whereby the unions themselves are in cahoots with government. So we have a very strong union in the education sector, the South African Democratic Teachers Union, which is part of COSATU, who are very close to the state. So therefore, the fact that our schools, not only the unions speak for these teachers, some of whom we don't teach at all because they're unionized, they're organized, etc., but also that partnership with the state where our schools don't have basic infrastructure. There are no whiteboards, there is no infrastructure such as classrooms, etc. So that focus around education has been lost. And that is why there's been a temptation to lower the standard of qualification, particularly at matric levels, where a pass rate of 30% becomes relevant. And therefore, we need to really relook into, firstly, our policies, look at how we can change the lives of our people by ensuring that those that are working in the sector do the right thing, but more importantly, the conditions, because I think the state also has not made it comfortable for those teachers in certain schools where conditions are unconducive because there are no toilets, the infrastructure is appalling. So there's a lot that needs to be done. But what that talks to leadership and accountability. And we've seen that the politicians themselves and refuse to be accountable, starting with the president at the top and going all the way down, where they're supposed to be accountable to people. They'll change the goalpost and focus on what monopoly capital than talking about the real issues. The real issues are a crisis, an economic crisis, a poverty crisis. We should call upon all of us as South Africans to focus on them so that we can uplift our people and grow this economy.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that children go to school, there are no toilets, the desks are falling apart, the infrastructure is just not there. It seems that there's a lack of interest there. Never mind the food. I mean, there isn't even, some kids are going to school and they don't even have food. Now, the reason I mention is that the fact is when you look at the national budget, and every year we see the budget being allocated, the biggest crux goes to education. Always. Where's this money being channeled to? Why is it not going to the right places?
Well, the money doesn't reach sometimes because, remember, within the allocation, we had privatized quite a lot of service providers. I mean, remember the Limpopo education books crisis that we had? It's because in our crisis of procurement, where procurement has been used as part of the repurposing. So in some of the institutions, there's a corruption. We've seen the Auditor General report, which shows to us the leakage and the lack of accountability thereof. So the middle persons that we see and take bulk of the resources, and by the time supposed to go where they're supposed to go, there's very little that is left. So we need really a real look at the systems and ensure that the state takes a lot of the responsibility so that those that are delivering are within the state, so that then we can hold them accountable. Because at the moment, with all these middle companies in pursuit of empowerment and radical economic transformation, that's where the leakage goes. So if those institutions were under the state, we know that the state itself has got a reservoir where books are ordered, there's a warehouse, and the state itself is accountable to channel those books and other resources, then we can know where the problem is. I think the proliferation of these entrepreneurs in pursuit of black economic empowerment are part of the problem.
All right, Lumkile, we're going to just take a break very quickly. We'll continue this conversation. We're going to talk about as much as we possibly can, but I think education is that issue that seriously needs a lot of attention. Let's see you after this.